There we go. Okay. Hi, everybody. Thank you guys so much for anyone that's joining us live or on the recording. I'm really excited to be doing my second Q&A. I've been so fortunate to meet some really amazing women from the Women's Business League. So if you are a business owner or entrepreneur, or even just looking to share what you do with your career, I highly recommend looking into them. They're amazing. And so I met Darcie a couple weeks ago virtually through Zoom. And anytime I meet someone who I feel like can selfishly educate me more on anything specifically related to like women's health, and then where I can then share that with you all, I am super excited. So tonight I'm so excited to be chatting with Darcie Pervier. She's a female health specialist, physical therapist, and the owner of Newburyport Wellness in Newburyport, Massachusetts. So Darcie, I would love to just start off with hearing a little bit about you, your family, and then sort of how you ended up where you are, because I know it was not just an overnight thing where you ended up with Newburyport Wellness.
Yeah, so I have been in Newburyport living here for 13 years. Actually, this week will make 13 years. And I always knew I wanted to do something in the health and wellness field and chose physical therapy. I've always had a string of women's health in my background, but really fell into postpartum recovery and women's health, and then kind of backtracking into pregnancy. And now that I'm entering the perimenopausal phase, kind of like growing into that range, as well as my needs have changed. So after my first daughter was born 13 years ago, I went, wait a minute, they did not tell me about all of this in recovery. Like, what is happening? And after having so many of my own health issues throughout my lifespan, knowing that you couldn't get all the answers from your doctors, I love them all dearly and they have a special place, but sometimes for our bodies, they're very intricate. So really having to explore those answers myself, I started to dive deep, not just in the physical therapy sides, but in like how we all work as a whole unit, because we're not just a body part, we're an entire being. So really taking the time to look at the whole being. So that's how I ended up here.
Awesome. And when you talk about postpartum, because I know for me personally, and so I'm guessing other people as well, I think we immediately think like maternity leave and then that's it, right? Like, and I think women especially, I work out a lot, and so I'm around a lot of women that do. We put so much pressure on ourselves to get back into shape, not realizing how long our bodies actually take to heal. And then you talk about women, like my girls are 3.5 years apart, but I know I have so many friends whose kids are much closer and having back-to-back pregnancies. So when you talk about like sort of your target audience, or when you refer to postpartum, in your mind, what is that definition? Because I'm guessing it's more than just the 3 months after having a baby.
Anyone who's had a baby, really. It lasts forever because there's no such thing as a choice that doesn't have a consequence in life. So the choice to have a baby, whether it's vaginal delivery or C-section, creates short-term consequences and long-term consequences. And so lots of people think that they heal, or like they had a C-section so they don't have to worry about leaking, but we're seeing women in their 50s now coming in with leaking, and it's scar tissue from their incision that's like binding to the bladder. So everybody has a story. And I guess what I love is not a specific demographic, but somebody who feels like their story hasn't been heard or listened to thoroughly, and that they want to get well and figure out and understand their body. And that can happen with postpartum trauma, right? We think of trauma as something big, but really it can be just like the birth not going the way you thought it would, and that our body holds on to that. And then it's how your body kind of finds it adapts to pregnancy. And so those adaptations, you can go through the first couple years postpartum, no problem. And then all of a sudden kind of hit a roadblock. And I always say, when women say like, I made it till I was 45 and then I fell apart, it's really not true. Like, we're always compensating from the time we're little. So our little ones are compensating for different things. We're not born perfectly symmetrical and, perfectly adapted to being our ultimate selves. And so after we compensate and compensate and compensate, sometimes those compensations no longer work. And then we end up with back pain or hip pain or shoulder pain. And it's like, this came out of nowhere, but no, it did. Or the moms who had like, I threw my back out once, but it went away in 3 days. But then it comes back again a year later. And it's like, I only had it, once a year, but then it becomes longer and more recurrent is typically the scenario. So we get signs early on, but we don't always listen to them. We're not taught to listen to our bodies intuitively.
Yeah. And would you say most of the compensation, again, I think my mind immediately goes to, because I feel like I recognize my pains more when I am exercising. But would you say that a lot of that compensation is just happening in everyday movement, like the way we walk, the way we sit, all of those things?
Yeah, I can give you some easy examples. Think of how you always hold your kids. It's usually on one hip, not the other. It's really hard to switch.
Yeah.
And even when we're done holding our kids, sometimes we adopt that stance and we're always shifted over to one side. I always call that like kind of developing a kickstand leg. Like once we're always over on our left leg, say, and the right leg's kind of like just there, the right leg becomes the kickstand leg, and the left leg's getting all the input and giving all that information to your body of where you are in space, and it's working. And the other side's like, nah, maybe she needs me, maybe she doesn't.
Yeah.
But that impacts your pelvic floor, it impacts your spine. And so we look at those patterns throughout the day for women to see what patterns might be contributing to their pain or their symptoms. So that would be one example. Another example would be just like the pattern of how we sit, right? Like desk jobs, the more we sit here, that pattern just shuts down the core and makes breathing less efficient. And then when we go to breathe, we're like using our upper airway instead of our full torso for breath. And it just makes it less efficient and less stable around the spine and less efficient for protecting the pelvic floor.
Yeah, so interesting. So you probably covered some of it, but what would you say? And I mean, I know you mentioned like the leg and the back. What would you say are the most common pain points or issues that you're treating or that you're seeing in postpartum?
It always boils down to core dysfunction. And that's really specifically goes down to breath dysfunction. So breathing is the mainstay of our stability system, and all motion flourishes from the core. So you can't move your arm without your core activating. You can't take a step without your core activating. So yes, I see women who have pelvic pain, they have painful sex, or they're leaking and they started leaking during pregnancy and it's not going away. See that postpartum for sure. Those are more acute kind of things. Back pain is common postpartum, but then as we look further out, it's this like I have chronic back pain, or my hip's been bothering me, or sometimes it's the leaking. Like I've had lots of people come to me and they're like, I can't take it anymore. I ran after my toddler and I peed on that on that 15-foot little jog, and I've had it. But then when we talk, they haven't turned or bent over in 2 years. They're like, oh, well, that's an old injury. I just don't do that anymore. At 40, should you not be bending forward? At 35, should you not be bending forward? Should you not be rotating and turning? Like we want to live to be 85, 95, 100. We need to be able to use our bodies when we're not even middle age. And so it's really about awakening women to, how their body could work for them to get it to work optimally. So it's always core dysfunction, because that pressure management system of breath is what protects your spine. It's what helps to maintain your pelvic floor integrity and minimize leaking and have healthy pelvic floor function, whether it's tight or you're leaking and it's too loose. Both sides of the story all relate back to breath.
So interesting. And this is probably a dumb question, but is all of those things related to the growing and carrying of a child? Or, I mean, are these things that you can see in women who haven't had kids?
Yes. So I might have given you the example of my daughter when we were chatting before, but I'll just use that because it's a really good example. And so my daughter, when she was 9, she's kind of like a slouchy kind of kid, and she couldn't do a push-up to save her life. And her belly, when I asked her to do them, never left the floor. And she could care less, but it looked like her spine was going to slide off her pelvis. And her friend did perfect push-ups, but she turned over when she was done and she was beet red, and her face looked like it was going to pop off her neck.
Yeah.
And so when I asked her to breathe and do push-ups, she couldn't do one push-up. So there's one 9-year-old whose pressure management strategy to create stability was to hold her breath and bear down with all of her might to be an A+ push-up student. And then there's my daughter who was like, I know what you're asking for and I
Yeah.
could care less.
Yeah.
And here's my strategy. And so we have the 9-year-old, fast forward imaginarily, 30 years, she's going to be the kid with prolapse and leaking because every time she jumps, because her pelvic floor is like on and it just can't take that pressure because she's bearing down all the time.
Yeah.
And my daughter, who does present with back pain on and off all the time now, she's starting to listen to me now, but for a number of years, it's like, yeah. But we see these things in kids. It's related to ACL dysfunction in girls, this core function. It's related to a lot of things throughout the lifespan. It's in that postpartum period or after, like say when kids are like 5 to 10, when moms are like, I can catch my breath and like maybe think about me for 2 minutes, like what's happening to my body, because we blame it on aging. But in the throes of it all, we're like, I'm only leaking when I'm jumping, so I just won't jump.
Yeah.
I'm only leaking when I'm sprinting, I just won't sprint. And then nothing stays the same. I think that's the reality, is absolutely nothing in life stays the same. That's the one thing we're guaranteed. And so your symptoms, while tiny now, are sure to grow or change and modify to something else if we're not paying attention to those signs and symptoms. Some things go by the wayside, but we want to be listening because it's really important to distinguish whispers, sounds, and alarms. So I say like a whisper is like that you sneezed, a couple of times when you're sick and you peed then.
Yeah.
And then a sound is like every time you sneeze, or 75% of the time you sneeze, you're leaking. And then we wait till we're like, oh my God, I can't run anymore because I'm peeing all the time.
Yeah.
We wait till we're an alarm, when we really want to be listening to those signs and symptoms when they're whispers or early sounds, because they're much easier to correct at that point.
Yeah. It's so interesting because I mean, I have definitely have that. And I had to just, when I would do some of my exercise classes, like I just stopped doing jumping jacks, because if I did, I mean, I had to either wear a panty liner or I had to like run to the bathroom. And so I would just do sort of like this weird running jumping jack. But I just figured, it's just still coming back together after, but this was a year ago. So only 2 years after, it was already 2 years after having my daughter. So, so interesting. So I actually had written down about sort of the bells and alarms. And I know that that's something that you teach, is just how to be a more intuitive listener to our body. And so I don't know if that's like the example, or if you have anything else to elaborate on that. I just had that kind of written down as a note.
Yeah, well, part of what I love working with women for is because we're like the big changers of the future. And we're raising, little munchkins, or we're the aunt's little munchkins if we don't have kids, or we have friends that have little kids. But if we can treat ourselves better and be more intuitive in our bodies, we can teach that to our kids. And so that was the big driver for me in doing all of this, was wanting something different for my girls. So like a breaking point for me was when I was younger, I had knee pain, and an orthopedic doctor told me to stop acting like a boy and act like a girl and play with Barbie dolls and stop playing sports.
Wow.
And I was like, what? And I was so young, and it hurt me so deeply, and it scared me so deeply. And I want so different for my girls. So I want us to be able to listen. But I think what happens with our culture is we're like, well, yeah, your back hurts, you still got to get up and go to work. Yeah, you have a migraine, you still have to. So how do we, if that's the mainstay, how do we differentiate when it's really not a good time to go to work? It's really not a good time to push hard. And we don't have that skill set. And so being intuitive about our bodies is really listening to like, well, what does it feel like when I do this? Is this the day that I should be doing my hard exercises, or is this the day I should be doing some yoga nidra and relaxing and restoring my body? That's intuitive body listening on a really like moment to moment basis. And when we do that, we're honoring our body.
Whoops. Wi-Fi got stuck. Hopefully it comes. Hi, I'm so sorry. All of a sudden my Wi-Fi just dropped. Like great timing. So sorry you started skipping. But so you were talking about intuitive and when to listen, when we should be pushing and when we shouldn't. And I think, I was just gonna say, I think sometimes we just figure any of those tweaks, if we just build more strength or if we get stronger, then we'll fix it all. When obviously you're saying in relation to breath and all of those things that that's not necessarily the key. And then I was going to say that's, for me and my nutrition coaching and whatnot, that's exactly what I try to teach people is how to start listening to their body. But what we sort of start them with is removing all of these foods that are sort of causing them all of these bells and alarms, like you said, but they're so used to them that they don't even notice that they're bloated or they're gassy. And so I think for a lot of us, we have to really, like you said, be more intuitive, but just sort of take a step back and really start listening. Because like you said, otherwise you just live with it and you don't even realize what's happening.
Right. I mean, that's why you and I connected, because I love what you do and I love your passion for what you do, because it's a cornerstone, right? You can do all the exercises. If you don't have the nutritional input to build the muscle, what good are your 4 exercises going to do to repair your, sore hip?
Yeah.
We need to have that cornerstone for gut health, and we need to have that for, we need to kind of use that as a building block system. And so if we don't have that, it makes everything else a little bit more difficult. So
Yeah.
You're right. It's so the same and so important.
Yeah. And I don't know if you can elaborate on that, but that was one of the other things I had was just sort of the relationship between aches and pains and gut health and the impact on the spine and all of those things. I would love to hear more about that.
Right. That's like a 3-hour talk. And it's fascinating. But let's start with the idea that your body looks at the day like a 24-chapter book. And if you do a great breakfast or your PT exercises or a great, HIIT workout, but you spend the rest of the day in this like high intensity, super stressed out state, and then you barely get in a lunch, or you're, you're just super stressed for the rest of the day, or you don't get great sleep and you're super tired, your body can't actually process those nutrients the same way. And it can actually, in a state of fight or flight, learn a new habit. It's really hard to learn a new habit or learn a new motor plan in that 1 hour of time when you've got 23 hours of the rest of your day that are kind of all crazy. So we need our gut and our brain to be talking to each other, because we hear all the time now that the gut is the second brain, and it truly is. It's really sending all this information back to your brain. And so how that impacts pain is that the more inflammation we have in our system, then the more those pain receptors, the nociceptors and all of the receptors in your body that interpret pressure, stretch, those kinds of sensations, the more likely they're going to read those sensations as danger versus it's just a little ache, no big deal. I can keep moving. I don't need to change my movement pattern. But if our body's in a state of alarm, it's going to read those messages as alarming. And you're going to end up with like this big pain or magnified pain. When if your nervous system's in a more calm, more relaxed state and less inflammation through the gut health, through our nervous system health, then it actually can help calm pain. So they did this crazy study and they had people with neck pain take a walk in the forest and their pain was reduced the same as if they went to PT.
Huh. That's so interesting.
Isn't that wild?
Yeah, it's crazy. And it's, we talked about this, you and I, a little bit. And I'm so grateful for the access, to doctors and things that we have here. But at the same time, it can be frustrating, for lack of a better word, that kind of stuff isn't talked about more. I'm actually reading this book, which has a funny title. Maybe you've heard of it, but it's called How Not to Die. And it talks about diet and its relation to mostly chronic pain. And it's kind of a sales pitch for veganism. So you have to read it with a grain of salt. But, it's just these studies that they have from hundreds of years ago, well, like 100 years ago. And like, I was just, and you can elaborate on this too, but I was just reading, it was funny after we talked, because I know your daughter has type 1 diabetes. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
Yes. And so I was reading about, diet, and this was more related to type 2 diabetes. And it's like, if this type of stuff was just shared more with patients, the amount of people that could naturally be helping themselves is so much more. And whether it's just lack of education or lack of time or other incentives that doctors are getting, that, that they don't do that. But, it's just, it's too bad, and I just, when you talk about that study, I just wish more people understood how much more control they actually have over the way that they feel and their health and their mood. And, when you talked about that, like I have learned in my health journey over the last 6 years, the effect for me, like the end of the year was a really great example. I started with a trip to Seattle to see my best friend mid-November. And I kind of just sort of went on this slow track of like not eating as clean as I normally do and indulging in way more wine and alcohol than I normally do and being less physically active. And I found myself in a really sort of dark spot at the end of the year. Luckily, I know enough about myself and all of that to know how to get myself out of it, but most people don't. And so their immediate thought is, well, I need, medication, which certainly it helps for sure. But even just small tweaks like going for a walk, I'm so grateful that I found, sorry, I'm totally going off a tangent, but I'm so grateful that I was encouraged to do this challenge last year that requires me to do a walk outside every day, because it got me outside every single day through winter. And that had a huge impact on my mindset. And that was one of my main reasons for wanting to do it again this year, because otherwise I wouldn't get that vitamin D. And again, obviously, as you just explained, just the general benefits that come from just getting out and walking in fresh air and nature.
Right. So the recommendation is like 30 minutes minimally outside. And really, if we can get out there first thing in the morning and like let our eyes see daylight, it actually helps for those women that might be watching that have sleep issues. We want to get out in that daylight, and that's going to help our melatonin and, just kind of helps with your day-night cycles. But we really need that. We really need that to calm our nervous systems. It's a great way to kind of calm that fight or flight response in our system and reset. So yeah,
so interesting. Yeah. And I know for me, it's the only time, except if I'm driving in the car by myself, it's the only time where I feel like I can be creative or things come to my mind. So I actually recently decided to switch up my routine a little bit, because usually I would come home, work for a little bit and then go for my walk. And now I'm going to go for my walk first, because I'm in a totally different mindset when I sit down to work. So So interesting.
That's great.
Yeah. So you might have sort of talked about this already and really in just exactly what you shared, but if you can, I know, and if you're like, I already talked about that, I know one of the things I found most interesting was just this concept of like stress, and it's our, with that, then our inability to really be able to absorb the nutrients that we are, eating and things like that, and how that can really be preventing us from getting healthier. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, stress is very taxing. And so I've had clients, I'm sure you've had participants who are like, I live a high stress lifestyle. I've always been a high stress individual. This is who I am, and I'm not going to change. And
Yep.
maybe, 10 years ago, I would have been that person too. 100%. Actually, I can fully admit it. My husband used to be like, I think you should go meditate. And I'd go, do you think I have time to sit around and think about nothing? But what happens is that when we are constantly putting out stress, when we're constantly in a state of stress, we are diverting our hormone production, which as humans is really important, but as women, it's really important. And so hormone production, the precursors that make our estrogen and our testosterone and progesterone, they're making cortisol instead, and it's a stress hormone. And that can be very depleting to the rest of our balance system. And so if you're super stressed, you can't actually digest food. It's because you need to be in a state of relaxation to digest food. So we can look at lots of different things with digestion, like the salivary digestive molecule, enzymes in your mouth, and that's the start to digestion, but it goes all the way through your system. So lots of people, have IBS these days, and all kinds of things that are going on. And if we're not absorbing those nutrients, then we can eat all the healthy stuff we want. We're not getting the best of it, right? It's a good start, but if we're not absorbing it, we're not doing ourselves justice. And so we really need to get our system into a state of calm, so that way, especially as the day goes, we should start with a boost of cortisol in the morning. And as the day continues, it should continue to decline. And then melatonin should boost up so that we can get a good night sleep. Because during sleep, we want like about 2 hours of deep.
Oh my gosh, can you hear me?
Log out and try again.
Okay, no, wait, we're still here. Are you good?
We're here.
Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. It's probably because my husband's probably watching like Netflix in another room. So, but thank you so much for that. And I think that's really important for moms to hear about the stress, because we're, constantly eating on the go or eating in the car, or, I remember I lived with my cousin for a while back in my 20s, and she used to talk about the idea of like looking at food as like, nourishment for your body. And I was like, oh my gosh, okay, whatever. Because at that point in my life, I was like, the one counting everything, and I need this much fiber for this much protein, which it all sort of makes sense in one way or another. But and that's one of the things I teach the most, like if you're just looking at food as a number, as opposed to like the nutrients that are in it and what it's doing for your body, which I know it takes time to get there, but we just kind of look at food as like, I just have to eat this for my body so I can keep going. And when you're not slowing down, and then not to mention, like you said, with the cortisol and the effect that that's having on our sleep patterns. And we know that, if we're not getting the enough or the right kind of sleep, then that's affecting our ability to, get as healthy as we want. And it's like just one thing after the other.
And it's a balanced approach. I think the thing is it can get overwhelming for
Yeah.
people to be like, I don't have time for all of this.
Yeah.
Okay, that's okay. We're going to pick, one place to start. And when you're working with people, like that's the thing of giving them some like easy, ways to go to nutrition things, because it's hard to do a lot of cooking, and it's hard to do a
Yeah.
lot of food prep in a week. And so we just pick one place to start with each person. And each person, I know you're doing this is an individual. And so when we're, leading them through, it's, what's best for them and matching with, what you have to offer.
Yeah. So if you could give, and I know speaking of that, it's very difficult to generalize anything, but if there were like, one or two or three things that you could send as like a general message that these are things that we could maybe incorporate into our day that could sort of help in this area, do you have any suggestions like that anyone watching this could maybe take away and do right away?
Yeah. So, so some easier ones to remember is breathing. So if we're breathing, we think we're getting a good breath sometimes, but sometimes it goes right to the belly and the belly just pops out and goes back in. But we really want a global breath. So you want your ribs to expand, your back to expand a little bit, your belly, and even your pelvic floor, so that when you're sitting, you feel your pelvic floor descending into a chair a little bit. And as you exhale, it floats back up. So say before you eat, your busy day, if you spent a little bit of time working on a nice breath in and then extending that exhale, and the longer you exhale, the more you should feel those ribs coming in and the belly coming in and zipping together and the pelvic floor coming up. Just taking some slow breaths is going to automatically calm you down. You could play 528 hertz music while you're eating, and that's going to calm the system down. It sounds so silly, but it really does. It's like the science says it helps to kind of set us up for that calm and relaxed state.
Uh-huh.
So putting that on a little bit before you eat, like 5 minutes before you eat or while you're prepping your lunch, would be a great way to kind of start to get into that state of mind. And then the last thing is chewing. We never chew enough. And so the more we're chewing, the more the digestive enzymes in our mouth are doing what they need to do to get the nutrients, start breaking down the food so we can get the nutrients. If we're chewing like a lot,
Yeah.
I think they did a study on almonds and it was like 40 times until it was like properly masticated. That's a
Wow.
lot of chewing.
Yeah.
So, really taking your time to chew and eat each bite is going to do mountains of good for your health and wellness plan related to food.
That's something I could really work on. I'm a fast eater, and I've noticed that my one of my daughters is the same. One of them is like my husband and is a very slow eater and eats compartmentalized, like one thing at a time. And then the other one's like me. We just mix it all together and then eat it super fast. And honestly, it's usually because I cook and I like what I cook and I'm like, this is so good. And then I'm eating it so fast because we're pretty good about sitting down and eating, but then of course you're thinking of a million other things. So, well, this was so great. I would love if you have anything that you can share, like how people can connect with you or any other programs that you have coming, going on. Obviously, in my flyer, we shared that people can follow you, at least on social media at Newburyport Wellness. And I'm sure, I know you have a website as well, but any other programs that you have going on that people could connect with you on, please share with them because I know that they probably will want to.
Yeah. So I run a pregnancy education course, which is really about self-care. It's less about the nuts and bolts of labor and delivery. And there is a section in there, but there's a big portion in there about self-care, nutrition. It's led by an acupuncturist, myself, and a functional nutritionist, and that's called the Radiant Pregnancy Program. There's a DIY, and then we'll be doing another live round coming up this winter. And in order to ask me questions, I always do like a consultation. I want to make sure that I'm the right fit for people. And if they need to be directed elsewhere, I want to make sure my primary goal is that people get the help that they need. So if they ever have any questions, we can just get in touch and set up a consultation call. And really it's just about, getting people in the right direction to who's the best fit and how we can help you and to be a better you and a healthier version of themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know, my goal is for myself and my clients is that, like you said, to be here. I think about where I am in my life, and my mom was younger when she had me, and I want to be present for my kids when they're in their 40s and when they have kids. And for me, that's what keeps me motivated. And I think that a longer life, but also being able to enjoy the life that we're living, without feeling like we're in pain or hurting all the time. So, Well, I really
Or we're
appreciate.
forgetful.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. I know. And I think it's just we sweep it under the rug, and it's just, yeah, taking a minute to think about it is great. So well, thank you so much, Darcie, for your time. I
Thank
really
you.
appreciate it. I know everyone else is going to love all of this. And I'll be sure to get this recording up so everyone can see it later.
Sounds great. Thank you. Have a great night.
You too, Darcie. Bye.
Bye-bye.